זה שאסור ללכת לצבא גם אם הוא כן לומד או לא לומד. אפילו אם זה נחל חרדי, כאילו מיועד לחרדים.
It's a whole different army. When you come in Orthodox, it's with a different head, coming to serve God.
20% of young men lose their religious identity while in the army. That's not a percentage which the Haredi world would be willing to tolerate.
We're in Jerusalem, and recently these streets have been the scene of violent protest and riots, but there hasn't been a Palestinian in sight. Instead, it's the Orthodox Jewish community who are furious with the army for trying to send their sons to war. In March of 2014, the Israeli government passed a law requiring the ultra-Orthodox, a community of mostly religious and conservative Jews known as the Haredim, to serve in the Israel Defense Forces. Previously, Haredi boys who studied in religious seminaries or yeshivas were exempt from Israel's universal conscription law, which requires all citizens from the age of 18 to serve in the army for 2 to 3 years. The decision drew fierce opposition from the ultra-Orthodox community, its leaders ordering that no one should comply.
I guarantee you it's not going to happen. No yeshiva student will serve in the army by coercion. He'll leave the country, he'll go into hiding, he'll go into the underground, or he'll go into jail.
We saw this sentiment echoed throughout the Haredi neighborhoods as anti-IDF posters were put up.
The poster is showing how the Israeli government is forcing the religious Jews to go to the army, but the army's values are not that of the yeshivot. There are many things in the army that go on that are, for a religious Jew, not permitted. And that's what you're seeing in this picture, that the religious Jew feels like he's being pulled into the garbage. Being what goes on in the army is like garbage to us.
The ultra-Orthodox have always sheltered themselves from the influence of the secular world, including the military. This goes back to the very beginning of the State of Israel, when David Ben-Gurion struck a deal with the Haredi community, allowing yeshiva students to forego military service as long as they remained in the yeshivas, protecting and preserving the Jewish religion. The exemption has never been popular with the secular community, and through the years, there have been attempts to try and find a compromise, including a deal struck with the IDF and a group of Haredi rabbis that created the Netzah Yehuda, an ultra-Orthodox battalion made up of volunteer soldiers. But as the Haredi population grows at an exponential rate, what started as a privilege granted to less than 400 Haredi boys has become a loophole for nearly 60,000. The Haredi community's weak presence in the army and in the workforce has prompted criticism from mainstream Israelis, who see the community as a financial burden to the country as a whole. Vice News went to Mea Sharim, one of the oldest Haredi neighborhoods in Jerusalem, and the site of many anti-military protests. We ran into trouble almost immediately. The Haredim are notoriously cloistered and try to isolate themselves from outside influences. Our being in the neighborhood was no exception to this rule.
We jumped out of our car and a guy stopped, stared at us, started twirling his beard, and has now been following us down the road for the last 10 minutes or so. We pulled out the camera and he just launched himself at the cameraman. It's clearly a sensitive community.
We managed to make our way to meet Yolish Kraus, the unofficial operations director for the Eda Haredi, one of the most vocal and radical factions of the Haredi community who refuse to recognize the authority of the state and are taking action against the new laws.
זה שאסור ללכת לצבא גם אם הוא כן לומד או לא לומד. שנים שבגיוס, לדוגמה, הם לא רוצים באמת, לא צריכים את החיילים. הם רוצים לגייס את החרדים כדי שלא יישאר חרדים. מי שהולך לצבא, בסוף לאט לאט הוא מדרדר, הוא נהיה חילוני. יש מידע עם 2 בנים שהם בגיל הגיוס, 2 קיבלו צו גיוס, והם לא ישנים בבית כבר, אחת לא ישן בבית כבר 1.5 שנה, ואחת 0.5 שנה לא בבית. אני נלחם, לא בשבילי, אני לא אלך, הילדים שלי לא ילכו לצבא. אנחנו לא ישראלים, אנחנו יהודים. אין לנו שום קשר למדינת ישראל. אנחנו עם ישראל. מדינת ישראל ועם ישראל זה 2 דברים. אנחנו במתקפה כל הזמן, לא רק בגלל הגיוס. בזמן האחרון זה מאבק מי ישלוט. אני טוען שבסוף החילונים יפסידו במאבק. למה? זה רכבת שדוהרת לתהום. זאת אומרת, זה יורד. עכשיו, אנחנו גם ברכבת הזאת, רק אנחנו נזהרים להיות בקרון האחרון. זה מודעות של ה-15 שנים האחרונות, שכל סוגי הרבנים, ספרדים, אשכנזים, ליטאים, חסידים, כל סוגי הרבנים שאמרו שאסור ללכת לצבא.
The Haredim, who practice strict observation of Judaic law, which requires a separation of sexes, keeping kosher, and shunning most modern technology, are at odds with secular society. Above all for them is preserving the study of the Torah. We spoke to Jonathan Rosenblum, an expert in Torah study, to see if he could shed some light on the conflict.
We are a small community in a modern world which is not generally hospitable to religion. The yeshivas are not just another institution in the society. They are the pupil of the eye of the Haredi world and are guarded as such.
For the ultra-Orthodox, the Torah is the organizing value of the entire society. Without it, they cease to exist. So the idea of the Haredi boys being drafted out of yeshiva into the secular world of the military is seen as a distraction at best and a corrupting force at worst. Though the community has ordered its boys to refuse enlistment, some of them have already found their way into the IDF, joining the Netzer Yehuda Battalion, created by a band of Haredi rabbis in the IDF in 1999 to integrate Haredi outliers into the military.
The relationship between the military and the Haredi community in specific frameworks and very worked out and planned environments can certainly be a win-win situation both for the army, for the state of Israel, and for the Haredi community. What's called the Nachal Haredi or Netzach Yehuda Brigade, that's mostly made up of boys who come from Haredi homes who have really fallen outside of the system prior to going into the army. Many of these young men were in very deep trouble, alienated and so forth. When they find the self-respect and the discipline that they get in the army, they have a much better chance of coming back to full religious observance.
So, from those who stray from the righteous path, the Netzer Yehuda seemed like an ideal alternative. The IDF was keen to show us just how ideal by taking us to meet the battalion. We were curious to find out if the recent furore over the new law would affect even this group of Haredi men, a group the IDF sees as a rare success story in the effort to integrate the religious and the secular.
So we're driving through the Jordan Valley. We're on our way to meet the only ultra-Orthodox battalion in the entire Israeli army. We're going to be spending the day with them in the desert, watching them running drills, shooting guns, saying prayers, just finding out what their day-to-day existence is like.
The battalion is responsible for operations around Jenin in the West Bank. Even though their numbers have grown from 89 recruits in its first year to more than 800 in 2013, they still make up a very small percentage of the total number of combat troops in the IDF.
Hello. Good morning. Alex. Nice to meet you.
הגדוד, גדוד נצח יהודה, זה הגדוד שאתה רואה, זכה ב5 פרסים בצבא. חיילים פה, בגלל הרקע שהם באו, יש להם מוטיבציה מאוד גדולה להצליח.
Why are they more motivated than other soldiers?
פה חיילים שבעבר לא סיימו שום דבר, לא למדו בישיבה, ולא למדו בתיכון וסיימו. וכשהם הגיעו לפה, לצבא, הם פעם ראשונה סיימו פרק, מסלול, הם לוחמים. הוא רוצה להוכיח לעצמו ולחברה שלו, שהנה, הצלחתי, אני טוב, מעריכים אותי, ולכן המוטיבציה הרבה יותר גבוהה ממקום אחר.
Although the commander would only hint at it, it seemed that the conscription of the ultra-Orthodox was on everyone's mind. But at least within the battalion, there seemed to be a balance struck between military service and religious observance. After prayers, one of the allowances the IDF makes for the Haredi boys, the soldiers began a drill to clear and overtake enemy territory.
Right now, we're taking that hilltop after heavy artillery fire has just cleared it.
But we've taken this hill, and now we're going to take them on.
As the exercise ended, we went back up the hill to talk to some of the soldiers about life in the Netzer Yehuda and if things had changed with the new law.
Why did you join the army?
To be completely honest, I didn't very much want to join. At first, I wanted to be in yeshiva. I started thinking about it. I said, if I'm going to go anyways, then I'm going to do it all the way. And it's a mitzvah. It's a good thing. It's a beautiful thing. You're protecting your country.
How do you reckon the experience of an Orthodox Jew is different from your average IDF soldier?
It's extremely different. It's a whole different army. When you come in Orthodox, it's with a different head. You're coming to serve God. You're coming with a higher purpose. You're coming with many, many more obligations, with many more restrictions and limitations, many more challenges. You have to sacrifice something. I don't get to study as much as I used to. I don't have time to sit down and study. I don't get to do many traditions that I normally want to do. Many things are compromised, but it's for a much bigger thing. It's for a bigger purpose.
What do the rest of the Orthodox community make of you joining up?
It depends. I mean, there's always the extremists who are against it, and they see somebody in uniform, and it's better to stay away from their areas because it gets actually dangerous. They could beat you up. They could spit at you.
Have you ever got abuse from the Orthodox community for signing up to the army?
I have no friends who were kicked out of their homes. I have friends who ran away from home because they couldn't stand living with it, or they couldn't deal with the pressure. The thing is that you do what you have to do. You represent God, and you keep being a God-fearing Jew, and you do what you have to do.
While the Haredi community's battle is with the government and the IDF, it seems that boys torn between their religion and duty to serve the military are getting caught in the crossfire. Though the battalion has made great efforts to maintain Haredi guidelines, even having a kosher cafeteria, the boys seem to agree that some compromises had to be made.
כגדוד אחד, כמקשה אחת, ואנחנו הולכים ועולים. שיהיה לכולנו בהצלחה, תאכלו, תהנו, ואל תשכחו את אישורי הזקן. בהצלחה.
I just wanted to know if you've had to make compromises with your religious life in order to fit in with the army.
אני חושב שחד משמעי זה לא אותו דבר כמו ישיבה, וזה מטבע הדברים לא יהיה ולא דומה לישיבה. אבל סוג של ירידה שצריך לעשות מי שרוצה בעצם לשרת את המדינה ולהגן על התושבים.
For these soldiers, serving the country comes at a price, and although they are willing to make that sacrifice, they know that the core of the Haredi community wouldn't agree.
What have been your reactions when you saw, the ultra-Orthodox riots?
אני לא יכול להתווכח עם אידיאולוגיה, אני יכול להבין את הגישה הזאת. אני לא מנסה פה לשכנע או לא לשכנע מישהו. אני עשיתי את מה שמתאים לי. חברה שבה אני הייתי חי זה נחשב צד יחסית חריג. זה היה קצת קשה בהתחלה מבחינת המשפחה, אבל בסוף למדו לחיות עם זה.
Can you explain to me why it wouldn't be easy for your family?
התרבות החרדית והתרבות הישראלית החילונית, בוא נאמר, זה שני עולמות שונים. התרבות החרדית היא תרבות שהאמונה שלה באלוקים זה מעל הכל. הם בשביל זה מוכנים להקריב הכל.
Recently, they've gone so far as to turn on their own. More and more documented cases have appeared of ultra-Orthodox community attacking Haredi soldiers. It's clear that the hardline Haredim will do anything to keep their sons out of the IDF. But as instability along Israel's borders increases, the IDF's need for more soldiers is only growing. And with the ultra-Orthodox community projected to represent almost 25% of Israel's total population by the late 2050s, it's unlikely that the IDF will back down. The government is moving forward with a new conscription law, setting yearly goals for Haredi enlistment with a benchmark of at least 5,200 new recruits by 2017. If that target is not reached, the softer goals will become mandates, backed up with criminal sanctions for draft dodgers. With current Haredi enlistments falling below targets, it's clear that the Haredim won't go without a fight.